Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Free Thought Forum. I'm your host presented by the Pennsylvania Nonbelievers. I'm your host for the evening, Jacob, and once again, I am joined by Doug. Hello, Doug.
Greetings, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Well, we got quite a bit to talk about tonight, but first, I'm going to hand it over to Doug with reminders of our upcoming events.
Okay. Unfortunately, we don't have any upcoming events. We did the last of our table events this last weekend, Saturday and Sunday, at the Pumpkin Fest. I guess the next table event will be after the new year. We'll let you know in plenty of time so you can arrive. Now, the upcoming meetings, they are a different thing. We have plenty of those. Here are the upcoming meetings. Chambersburg meeting will be on October the 21st. Perry County meeting will be on October the 16th. The Lancaster meeting will be October the 22nd. And once again, we will be having our York meeting on the 1st of November. That, of course, will be at the in the Carriage House at the UCY Church on South George Street. The Lebanon meeting will be on the 12th of November, and our Harrisburg meeting will be on the 13th of November. And our next Free Thought Forum will be on October the 28th of this year. So tune in for that too. We'll talk more about that later. Back to you.
All right, thanks. As I mentioned, we have a lot to talk about tonight. We'll be sort of wrapping up our table season for the summer, and also talk about. We've actually had quite a few things going on over the last couple of weekends as an organization, and I'll get into the philosophical discussions we had. I should say I'll be continuing some of the philosophical discussions we were talking about last time. But I have to say first, however, one thing I'm personally looking forward to coming up that's not part of the organization but more of national movement news is the book Christianity is Not Great will be releasing on October 20th in all formats. Well, actually, I shouldn't say all formats. I should say hard copy and Kindle. I don't think there's an audio book for it yet. But if you're not familiar with the series, and if that title looks familiar to you, it is it's a spin-off of the book God is Not Great, which was written by the late Christopher Hitchens. And this is the third book in a series of books that have been put out by an anthology of authors, that is several different authors who are scholars and experts in their particular field in the atheist movement. It's edited by John Loftus, who was actually at our last conference in Pennsylvania, the one out in Pittsburgh over the Labor Day weekend. But as I said before, it includes all sorts of ex-biblical scholars. Well, actually, I shouldn't say ex-biblical scholars, ex-Christians who are biblical scholars, such as Hector Aviles. And it's the general topics we'll talk about in this book. Well, I should say this is the third book in the series. The first one was called The Christian Delusion, which mostly went after a lot of the different claims about Christianity, both from historical evidence and some of the philosophical arguments. The second one was The End of Christianity, which really kind of rehashed a lot of the points and said kind of, I don't know, I felt like the book itself lost a little bit of focus, but showed why Christianity that the opposition to Christianity is valid and why it's good that we fight. But Christianity is Not Great is I think going to be the knockdown of everybody who tries to say that that Christianity has been a positive influence on the world. That even whether or not it's true, it's still good that you have it around. And actually, I saw John Loftus just released the table of contents for it, which looks like it's going to discuss everything from the Dark Ages to, witch hunts throughout the years, and even some of the modern problems that Christianity has caused the world. So look for that on October 20th. And if you do want to get it and support this organization, go to our website, panonbelievers.org, and click on the little Amazon link, and a portion of the profits will go to the organization at no extra cost to you. But if you don't want to get it when it comes out, I hope to do a review of it next month sometime. Although I'm not making any promises.
Well, you got a lot on your plate as far as reading goes, don't you?
A bit. I really like reading through the books and kind of giving critiques of them, so I can. Yeah, although I mean, I love reading books over breaks at work, so I like to stay informed on all the different topics. But the first two books in the series have been pretty good, especially The Christian Delusion. I thought was a very, very good book. So I'm really looking forward to this one as well. But on to some of the events that have been happening over the last couple of weeks. A few weeks ago, we attended a protest in Bedford County, which was to protest the charges brought against a teenager who took a somewhat tasteful photo with a Jesus statue, and and the protest wasn't about whether or not we agree with what he did. That wasn't the point. The point really was talking about some of the nature of the charge filed against him, which it wasn't a vandalism or trespassing charge. In fact, he didn't even damage the statue at all. What the charge was desecration. And the way the law defined desecration was, and to paraphrase, it was essentially anything that, part of what the definition of desecration was anything that could be perceived as an action that would be offensive to somebody.
And absolutely no physical damage was done to the statue. It was not marked, destroyed, painted, graffiti, nothing of that. The kid just made some irreverent moves.
Right. So I mean, I just kind of, I even told people if the charge were vandalism or trespassing, that'd be one thing. I probably wouldn't even gone to it, but the actual law itself really amounted to a blasphemy law, and especially since the district attorney made his intentions. Well, I should say back up for a second before I move on. I thought overall the protest went pretty well. We got actually a lot of attendance and we actually had the help of. It wasn't just our own group; it was several others, including a local group called Truth Wins Out, and also we had the help of American Atheist. David Silverman himself, the president of American Atheist, showed up to help us out.
Was there any news coverage of it at all?
Yeah, there was actually a bit of press, which I'll get to in a moment.
Oh, sorry, didn't realize.
But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little off my flow of thoughts here. But what I wanted to say was the district attorney really made his intentions pretty clear. Just ahead of our protest, they were asking him about it, and he described the kid who did the action as being part of the, and I quote, anti-Christian, banned school prayer, war on Christmas, opposed display of the Ten Commandments crowd. And I kind of laughed at that because the reason I bring that up is actually when David Silverman was talking to the crowd, he gets up and says, "I'm David Silverman and I'm part of the," and he pulls out his phone as if he's reading it going, "Anti-Christian banned school prayer." He's like, "That's me you're talking about. I'm part of that crowd."
I wasn't aware there was such a crowd, but
No, but it was. The point is, it's like it was obvious that he was there to basically try to protect his own religion, it wasn't about him trying to seek justice. It was really about religious beliefs, and he made that clear in an interview. I mean, we have the entirety of the interview you can find online, but it really goes on to show clearly that what his intentions were. And we even and as coming back to the press, we actually did get quite a bit of press, although some of it was rather interesting. One of the first reporters on the scene was known as the Bedford Free Press, which I don't think is an official news organization. It's more or less a web page and a YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. Which, I'm not trying to knock them for that. Like I actually respect people going out there in maybe a more rural area that doesn't really get a whole lot of news coverage to form their own sort of unofficial news station. I mean, if they can go out there and do that well, I actually support them fully on that. But unfortunately, the reporter wasn't very professional about it, and as soon as he got there, he started arguing with us. A reporter arguing with a protest is very, very unprofessional. Although later we found out why. It's because he's actually good friends with the district attorney. And
oh, what a shock!
Yeah, there was a photo of him and the district attorney that was found online, and so it was pretty obvious that he was defending the district attorney for that reason. But I mean, he was just in an unrelenting argument against some of the people in the group to the point we just had to get him out of there.
Yeah.
So, but other than that, there was also some other a couple of major news organizations that did cover the event, and you can find all of that, all of the coverage online. If you go to the PA Nonbelievers Facebook page, under the events tab, you can find the Bedford County protest, and that's where all the information is posted if you want sort of the wrap up and news stories. And
sorry, it's kind of worrisome about this particular charge. It really could set a very, very nasty precedent.
Right.
I mean, if I were to say, walk by the same statue and give that same statue the finger, could they arrest me on the same charge? How about a billboard that's, it says Jesus loves you, and it's got a picture of Jesus, and you make some obscene gesture toward it? Boy, that really is worrisome.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is it's just the way, how broadly it defines desecration.
Yeah,
it makes it applicable to many situations it clearly should not be, especially if you look at this charge in particular. Mm-hmm. Now, it's kind of interesting that you bring this up because earlier this week I saw a picture circulated around Facebook with somebody had a flying spaghetti monster emblem ripped off the back of their car, snapped in half, left on their bumper, and somebody on a Post-it note wrote a hate message. And we were joking around, going, "Could this be desecration too?" I didn't realize you had the photo, but this is the photo of what was going around, and I'm glad that the I edited out the Post-it note because it does include a homophobic slur. But yeah, it's something like that could actually be considered desecration. Well, actually, that can be considered vandalism because you've taken something off a car and broken it.
Yeah.
But you could even see a charge like desecration, and one of the things about this law is it actually carries up to a 2-year jail sentence, which is just ridiculous.
You know what they used to happen? Have you ever seen the fish stickers on the back of the people's cars? Well, what was it? Evolve Fish.
Right.
I guess it was, who was trying to sell stickers, these fish, to promote evolution. So they put fish with little feet on them.
Right.
And at first, what people found was that people would come along, they wouldn't try to peel off the whole fish. What they would do is that they would break the feet off the fish, but still leave the emblem on the car. And one of the greatest marketing ideas I think that I've seen, this company called Evolve Fish, now made and sold replacement feet that if someone had taken them off your car, that you could stick them back on and without buying a whole new emblem, which I thought was a great marketing idea.
And it's just terrible that they even have to do something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that an idea can't stand criticism. But I should say that unfortunately, at the end of it, the mother of the teenager decided to accept the punishment, except in juvenile court that the parents can really have a lot of control over what kind of pleas can be entered. And they accepted 350 hours of community service and a 6-month ban from all social media, which I think, 350 hours for a teenager doing this kind of charge is actually, I think, very excessive in itself. But unfortunately, that's within their right, and obviously.
But did he have to enter a guilty plea?
Well, I don't know. I don't know the ins and outs of juvenile court, but essentially, part of the idea is if he completes all of these requirements, he can actually have his record expunged. So that, he won't actually get any permanent record out of this.
Okay, so it looks pretty good then that they couldn't use this then as a precedent for future actions, or could they?
Again, I'm not really up to speed on juvenile law.
Well,
actually,
we'll see
Yeah.
whether or not someone else tries to pick up the gauntlet and
right. Yeah,
run with it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's there's some ins and outs of the technicalities with juvenile law that I'm not completely. I think I know how it works, but I don't want to say because I might very well be wrong about it, and I don't want to give anyone the wrong idea. But obviously, and really kind of going. This could have ended up as a long court battle, especially if you go after. If they were found guilty and they want to fight it to the law and constitutional basis, that could be a very long and involved court case. So I can understand the parents not wanting to go through with that.
Oh no! I mean, they would have been, had their house probably vandalized, and all the angry people.
Yeah, because that was part of my point was, then you run into things like that. You run into pressure. Then things start becoming public. Especially when you go through a court case, because of right to know laws, there's a lot of things that will become public, and I can understand. We don't mean to come across like we're condemning the parents just accepting this plea. It's just, I understand. We understand where they're coming from, but it's just in the future it'll be interesting to see how this develops. But if it goes further, we'll definitely be there to.
Well, it's definitely like a blasphemy law in a way.
Right. But moving on to our wrapping up our excuse me, wrapping up our summer table season, which we actually had another first time. We had a couple tables. We had a first time. That was our first time here. We did Adams County a few weeks ago, and now just recently, the first Saturday in October, we had our first table at Newport Canal Day. Now, I should say, the Adams County table went actually very, very well. We had a very friendly crowd there. It was I was pretty surprised actually at how friendly it was. Although apparently it was a little bit more of a liberal event. It was more accepting, but it was still, even so, it was still a great experience. There was even religious people there that were coming over and having a friendly chat.
Didn't see an unfriendly face,
No.
which is actually unusual for a first-time table.
Yeah.
Usually they nail you pretty good first time you're there, but everyone was so friendly and outgoing.
And from what I understand, apparently from at the stage of the event, when it was threatening rain, apparently somebody actually said, you could either pray for the rain to hold off or go to the atheist booth and ask for an umbrella. And of course, now we're looking into maybe that possibility of selling umbrellas at our table. I don't know if
that would be a great idea.
Yeah, that would be a great item. And I would maybe you could even post the quote from Mark Twain on him when he said something like, "It's better to check the weather report before you pray for rain." Yeah. We could have a lot of fun with that, and actually. Now that they've mentioned that, we're like, man, that would definitely make a great item.
Maybe even have a little atheist symbol on the.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have to be big and gauche.
Right.
Just a little, A there. So.
Yeah, but it's something to look into. Although I don't know if we'll actually do it or not. But I just thought that was funny. It was really, really funny.
But you can buy inexpensive umbrellas now
Right.
for under $5.
Yeah. But anyway, then we had Newport Canal Day, which was the first Saturday in October, and that actually was showing surprisingly well too. Maybe didn't get quite the crowd we were hoping for, although there was kind of a cold rain in the morning that kept a lot of people away. But other than that, I thought. There was still people friendly. I think we only had one person really come up to argue with us, and it wasn't really a whole lot. He seemed at least interested in talking. It wasn't just preaching at us. It was.
What kind of argument was it?
Well, he started with the general "where did everything come from" argument.
Okay.
And we went on that for a little bit, and then he moved on to the moral argument. And well, then he obviously hasn't looked into it too much, because he actually tried to say that animals don't have any morality at all, which is demonstrably false. I mean, there was so much science done on this to show that they have at least a proto morality, or at least some concept of it. And then it wasn't long of talking about that he actually jumped right back into where did everything come from. It's like that's all he had. That's all he had. So and really, I joke is like there's only maybe 3 or 4 arguments anybody ever presents to us at these tables. It's where did everything come from? Something about morality. Occasionally we get a what if you're wrong, and then there's might be various other like little arguments here and there, but those are the major ones. Which it's like, you keep hearing those over and over again, and you become a little bit more confident in the fact you're an atheist.
Yeah.
That's.
You say, is that the best you got? Come on, give me something that's really going to stump me.
Right, and that's all it comes down to. And then you realize that not only are they simple arguments to deal with, but those 3 arguments can literally be used by every single religion on the planet. Mm-hmm. So that's what I try to point out to people. Although when I tried to point that out to the one person in Newport, he said, "Well, I want you to understand the general idea that there might be a God." And I'm like, okay, let's say for the sake of argument, I accept that for a second. And then from there we go to the moral argument, and when we start to refute that, he comes right back to where he was before, and hasn't presented a single argument that could only imply Christianity.
But you know what always gets me about these people? You know, they will turn to you and they will say, okay, look, just for a moment here, why don't you just pretend that there is a God?
Right.
And you say, okay, I'll go along with it. We'll say that there is a God. Then you turn around to them and say, okay, now you pretend for a moment that there is no God. Yeah. No. You know, it's like you can't even pretend for a second.
Well, actually, that's an interesting point you bring up, because even there were a few during the debate between Ken Ham and Bill Nye. Mm-hmm. There was actually during the Q&A, there was a question that came out that said, where someone asked Ken Ham a hypothetical question. Let's say for a second you were convinced of evolution. Would you still believe in God? Which I thought was a perfectly valid hypothetical question to ask him.
Great.
He would not answer it. He refused to even entertain the question. And it was just like this, the hypothetical question is meant to say, okay, it's supposed to kind of be thought experiments, test some ground here.
You're not agreeing to anything.
Yeah, you're not
just
agreeing to
doing
something.
what if.
Yeah,
you know.
But he wouldn't even answer it. He just flatly refused to answer it. And I think that's, and I think it was, I forget the philosopher who said that, said something to the effect that the sign of a mature mind is one that can entertain an idea without accepting it. Mm-hmm. And then that's, I think, what you need to do is sometimes entertain an idea while arguing for and against it. You know, debate yourself constantly. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the most effective ways to know not only what you believe and what you don't believe, but exactly why for both of those things.
Well, sometimes it's really entertaining to support something or a side or an argument that you really don't believe in, because it also helps you see the other person's point of view by arguing for someone else's point of view and something that you don't really believe in. But just pretend for a minute.
Right. And I think another point there is sometimes if you do that, you can weed out some of the bad arguments being presented by both sides. And it's actually been shown that if you try to support a strong, like if you say you have 3 strong arguments for something and a weak argument, if people think if people can refute the weak argument, they automatically assume they can refute the strong arguments. Mm-hmm. Now it's fallacious, but that's just how our brains work. So if, say, you're talking with someone you agree with, and you start debating some of the points, even though you're not really you agree with them, but you're just saying for argument's sake, it can help the both of you really strengthen your own arguments when you go to present it to somebody else. Mm-hmm. But I didn't mean to go off on a little tangent, but I thought it was an interesting.
No, but it's an interesting
talking point.
Make.
Yeah, it's an interesting talking point, which I think is important when we're out at these booths, is to represent our position as well as we can, and I think it's important, and it's also important to just not only that, but to really show support for the atheists who are there, and even though we didn't get a whole lot of traffic at Newport, it was still worth it just to see the smiles on people's faces as they walk by. Maybe say something like, I saw someone lip, "That's awesome," as they walk by. I mean, they didn't come up to us, but I think sometimes I wonder if some of them are just still a bit closeted.
Yeah, because they don't want to get too close in case people think that they might be interested or maybe a closet atheist.
Right. But even if that's the case, it's still worth it to me to show that kind of support. Mm-hmm. And then we wrapped it up at Pumpkin Fest in Enola, which was a 2-day event. Unfortunately, the first day was sort of a rainy, dreary mess. But the Sunday was a really nice day, and we got actually quite a bit of business that day. Didn't get a whole lot of arguments either. It was a very friendly event to us. Although, from what I understand, it hasn't always been that way. But
it started off where there were some people made some physical threats against us, and we had one church group get a whole bunch of children to come up to our booth, okay, and making a disturbance, knocking things over.
Wow.
And it wasn't a pretty sight. And you go down to their booth, and there are all the kids in their booth. So there was no doubt that where they were from.
Right. So it's and that's part of our goal too. Is just we go there for a couple. The more times we go to an event, the more we really get accepted, and everyone gets used to us. Mm-hmm. Which is, part of our goal as well is to normalize atheism, so that it won't be a big deal if an atheist group shows up somewhere.
No, the more we show up, the less threatening we become to them. We don't go there, trying to threaten people or beat them into turning to atheists. We're always outgoing and friendly and welcome. Do you have any questions?
Right. And I should clarify that if you've never seen us at a table, we don't actually go out and engage people. They come to us.
Yeah.
And in fact, we're very cautious about that. That we. It's really not until they come up and start looking around that we might just say good morning, whatever to start the conversation. But we never really go out into the event looking to engage people. It's just them coming to us that we get all these discussions.
Yeah, it's a lot of the church groups don't follow the same rule.
Right. Right. But other than that, it was a really fun event. Got to meet and talk to a lot of people. Although I was surprised for Newport Canal Day, I was expecting to see people I used to go to church with. But
well, you live in that area, right?
Yeah, I live in that. I grew up I grew up there. It's just pretty close to my home. The church I went to. Although I think there were around. From my apartment, I should say, from my apartment in Newport, you go 2 blocks in any direction and you'll find a church. I think there are at least five churches within 2 blocks of of the square in Newport. So I was expecting a lot more, but.
What kind of church? They all just Christian churches, or are they?
I think mostly in Newport itself. I think they're all Christian churches.
Yeah.
Now, in the next town over, there's a Mormon church, actually. And actually, we had a couple Mormons stop by the table just to say hi. Yeah. They weren't arguing with us. They would just say, hey, how you doing? Yeah. And we're, by the way, we're Mormons. I'm like, oh, okay. And walked out. That was about the extent of it.
Any Jewish people there, or
doubtful
Islamic?
Not I don't. Not that I know of. Okay. Not that I know of, but it's mostly Christian churches. Although my landlady actually is into some Eastern stuff. I don't know exactly what.
Maybe.
No, I don't think it's Hinduism, but it's one of the other ones. It's not Hinduism or Buddhism, but I think it's something else. Well, I don't know for sure. I should say, but. It's
but it looks
no, she does engage in some of the I don't remember what it's called, but it's some sort of Eastern meditation. Mm-hmm. That's not the ones I'm familiar with, though, unfortunately. But of course, I've always been a little bit more curious about Eastern religions, but I keep putting that off, unfortunately. But now I'd like to get into the segment of our show we've been doing for a while, which is about philosophy, just discussing some of the basics of it, some of the more usefulness of it, aspects of it, because as we've said before, sometimes it can be hard to know where to start in investigation in looking into philosophy. And I think I was going to talk a bit about epistemology today, which is actually a pretty rich subject, and unfortunately, because of everything else we had to talk about today, I won't get to be able to go into the ins and outs that I wanted to. And it is also it can be a very dry aspect of philosophy as well. But what basically epistemology is this? It means the study of knowledge, which there are several different branches of it, including the how to acquire knowledge. And what we're really talking about there is methods. How do we go about finding out what we know? And there's all sorts of different philosophical schools of thought about this. And it's changed so much over the years. So sometimes if you get into this, you start to run into what the early philosophers thought about it, then how it developed over the years. And really, some of the questions people always strive to answer is, well, how can we be certain of something? We're trying to acquire knowledge, but how can we be certain about it? And some people want to say you have to be absolutely certain to have. Let's just say at one end of the spectrum you have people who want to be absolutely certain about something before they say it counts as knowledge. And then you have sort of this other point where people think that even if something has a non-zero probability of being true, you have to accept the possibility is true, no matter how unlikely. So that kind of goes into that's a lot of the different ideas. I mean, most people I'd say hang out somewhere in between those, where we care about what's probable, not just about what's possible. But we accept that there's a non-zero possibility we'll be wrong, that we're not absolutely certain about something. Even if we're talking about something like science, which is usually when we talk about scientifically proved or scientific certainty, sometimes it's meant to say that it's absolutely certain, but actually that's inaccurate, because science itself is not saying absolute certainty. That's why things are always presented with a possibility that they'll be disproven later if evidence shows up that if evidence shows up that shows that what we thought about something was wrong. And it's really changed over the years too. Science is now very empirically based. It's all based on evidence and observations. And the difference in the methods, and the modern scientific method, I should say. But actually, science wasn't always like that. For a long time, it was actually based more on intuition. People thought that you could just think your way through science and figure out what something's going to do. But obviously, that method's going to be very unreliable because science is not always intuitively obvious. And it was really later thinkers like Galileo who started demonstrating that no, you have to test something in order to prove that it's true. And he started debunking a lot of the claims made about the scientific claims made that were based on intuition. Like he said, like everyone thought that heavier objects always fell faster than lighter objects, where it's actually not the case, where mass doesn't play a factor in that.
And in a vacuum.
Well, in a vacuum at least, yeah. Although he was demonstrating with bowling balls, well, not bowling balls, but I think it was cannonballs, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, different size cannonballs.
Right, and showing that they were sliding down a ramp at the same rate, and showing that, and that was like usually. Now I'm sure there's probably were other cases and other thinkers pushing it for more empirical base, but Galileo was really one of the first famous ones to that we have that we actually have historical documentation of. And so that's really where the modern and really, as I've heard some people point out, is that the scientific revolution during the Enlightenment didn't really introduce any new methods to science. It just finally realized that less reliable methods were less reliable, which is, it's another one of those cases where things that seem like they're common sense today weren't back then. The people had to figure this stuff out the hard way.
And keeping in mind, too, that, there are methods and there is methodology. And whereas methods are the tools that you use,
Right.
and methodology is the way that you use the tools to gain knowledge.
True. Yeah, I mean, a good tool can always be misused.
Yes.
It's another thing. And that's why you look at science a few hundred years ago, you had, people like Sir Isaac Newton who was into alchemy, or, other people who were, you have astrology being published in the same journals as proven science. So that's really how, we kind of take for granted, how well refined the methods themselves, like not just science as a body of knowledge has progressed, but just the methods we use to approach science have changed dramatically over the years to the point where we can be much more certain about it, although not absolutely certain. Mm-hmm. Now, I think one of the more interesting things we get into is when we look at history, because history can't come up to the same level of certainty as science, and actually the methods for documenting history are for at least more accurate history has only arisen recently. In fact, some journals have published critiques of pretty much saying that any historical conclusions reached before 1950 should be disregarded, because that's when the methods before 1950 the methods were very shoddy, and you pretty much can't trust a historical conclusion drawn before then unless it's been revisited and vindicated. I mean, it doesn't mean they're automatically wrong, but you should be that is encourage more skepticism for anything before that point, or at least like any conclusions reached before that point shouldn't be used as a citation, rather. But there's actually a pretty good book put out about historical methods. The book is called Proving History. It's written by Richard Carrier, who's a pretty famous author who's written a lot of really good books, and this, I think, is one of his more informative books about just historical methods. It talks at length about all the different ways they evaluate history and go about trying to figure out just what happened. And now this book is actually the first of two book series he's writing about the historicity of Jesus. So he does really talk a lot about that, although he doesn't really go in depth into it, but he's mostly just talking about the methods being applied to the historical study of Jesus. And he goes into all the different criteria they look at, because they try to establish the probability of an event. Because when you're talking about a conclusion of history that something happened, really what we're talking about is probability. What most probably happened. Mm-hmm. And we talked a little bit about Occam's razor the other week, where the Occam's razor shows us the most probable instance is probably the one that's true.
Yeah, and it's the simplest.
Yeah, simplest, most. Well, actually, he actually goes into the methods why the simplest makes it the most probable as well. Mm-hmm. If you have the fewest assumptions that you can't justify, or I should say the fewest assumptions there are, it's most likely true. because there's sometimes where you sometimes have to fill in the blanks in history because you're not, and that's one thing with history is you don't always have all the evidence. But I mean, obviously, you might wonder, well, why learn historical methods? But I think some of these are applicable to day-to-day life. And he also goes over an equation known as Bayes' theorem, which is what this book is a lot about too, that is used to evaluate probability. And it's based on essentially 4 numbers. It's the prior probability that something is true. And the example we use is if I say I own a car, I probably don't have to tell you much to convince you of that, because a lot of people own cars. It's not a big deal to say that. But if I said I own a nuclear missile, you know those at least exist, but you have every reason to think that I don't have one.
And hope you don't have
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
But it's, and then he goes on to say, well, what if I say I have an interstellar spaceship? Well, now you don't even think those things exist at all, much less I have one. So, and that's really the logical basis for the statement, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And the other thing you look at is, I said 3 numbers, I'm sorry, it was 4 numbers earlier, it was actually 3 numbers. Then you actually go into an evaluation of the evidence. First, what is the likelihood of the evidence if my claim is true? But unfortunately, most people stop there. You also have to look at it as, well, how likely is the evidence I have if my claim is not true? If I say I own a car, but I present my driver's license as evidence, that's almost just as likely as whether or not I have a car. So that's kind of the idea is, and I'll get into that a little bit more later when we look at some of the criteria he talks about. One is called physical historical necessity. But basically what that is could history have proceeded any other way if the claim didn't happen? And if the answer is no, we can actually be pretty confident the claim did happen. And he gives a couple of examples of this where, essentially saying, if Caesar hadn't won this battle, there's no way the Roman Empire would have lasted any longer than it did. So we can say that there's no way anything could have happened, that there's no way that history could have proceeded as it did had, this event not happened. And we also like to find any direct physical evidence. If they say a battle happened somewhere, you'd like to find, broken shields and, bodies.
Yeah, all kinds of artifacts.
Right. Because actually in that case, eyewitness testimony is pretty unreliable. I mean, you might just have a general boasting that they won some major battle, but if you have no evidence that the battle actually took place, and we know that oftentimes people have made up stories about what they did, that's why we like to have physical evidence more.
Like the Battle of Jericho.
Right.
And the walls came tumbling down.
Well, and actually, you could say that about a couple of the battles in Canaan where there's no evidence that there was actually an army there. There might have been maybe an uprising from within, a riot of some sort. Actually, I think the one town looked like it was destroyed by a riot, not an invading army.
And any time that you have an invading army there, you usually will get artifacts from the people that were there, and they don't just go in, have the battle, and then just boom, walk right out. They bivouac right there. They have meals. They have broken pottery, and you find all these wonderful artifacts there to show that there was a whole bunch of people here at this location. And it strengthens the fact that, okay, now a battle could have taken place here.
Right. And that's one of the things they talk about with Mormons' version of history is they talk about steel weapons in America long ago. And they're like, there's no way that meant steel was produced and we don't have a single weapon to show for it. Or even as the one person say, sure, you could lose the weapons, but how do you lose the steel mill? It's like, that's the thing. It's like, And that's what we mean by unexpected evidence, and also absences of evidence. You know, now people try to say that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So that's actually not true. Because if there's times that you should see evidence somewhere, and if it's not there, you can start to conclude that, you know, this probably didn't happen. Especially if it's something like, you know, there's not even a steel mill to show for this. You know, that's there's highly unlikely if this happened.
But you do have to accept the fact that just maybe
Yeah.
they haven't found a steel mill yet, that it could have been there,
Right, right.
but you just haven't found it.
Well, and it also depends on the gravity of the claim. Like,
Yeah.
if you want to say that these two people had a sandwich, you know, at this restaurant on some day, it's not an extraordinary claim. You're probably not going to have evidence of it.
Yeah.
But it's not that extraordinary claim to really that's going to leave
To throw it
evidence.
out. No, you'd say, well, yeah, okay, I'll buy that.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing, if the event is expected to leave lasting evidence and we don't have that, that's when absence of evidence becomes evidence of absence. But again, you know, witnesses can be useful, but they have to be scrutinized.
Reliable.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into evaluating a witness testimony. One of which is like, well, how many witnesses do we have, and were they independent? And one thing he talks about is actually cooperation without collaboration. That's which, you know, so let's say you have Christian evangelists talking about the Gospels being 4 independent witnesses. That's not actually the case. We know they were copying from each other, so they're not independent. So that reduces the quality of that statement, of their testimony. But if, say, you have an ally of a king saying this about an event, and you have an enemy of that same king recording the exact same thing about the event, you can be pretty confident that how they describe it is how it happened.
Yeah, or somewhere in the middle.
What I was saying is, if you have if they're saying the same thing about the event,
Okay.
If they're saying the same thing about the event from 2 different sources, from 2 different standpoints, then
You can consider it gospel.
yeah, we can
almost.
yeah we can be sure about it. But
Yeah.
unlike, you know, let's, you know, bring up the example of the Gospels again. We don't even have anybody writing anything about what happened in there, much less a hostile testimony. You know, if we found hostile testimonies of it at the time of the event, then they could make some claim of historicity. But since we don't even have any corroboration at all, it's highly unlikely any of that stuff actually happened. And then you look at just we mentioned a little bit before, how plausible is the theory? You know, if it's some elaborate scheme that, you know, with all sorts of ad hoc assumptions that we can't quite justify, but I should say, like, if the ad hoc assumptions are something you need to make this theory work, then it's less likely that it's actually happened that way. And actually, that's what you get a lot in creationism, is they try to build all these things that might have happened, but the argument that possibly, therefore probably, is not a good argument. And that's what you get a lot. Is just because it's possible does not mean it probably happened.
You have to have justified true belief
Right.
in something, which they call the JTB, which is something that people accepted for a long time. In fact, up till 1963, till a gentleman named Gettier came along and posed what he called the Gettier problem, which we're running out of time now and we don't have time to get into it, but I'll talk about it later. And it's just an interesting way they pose a problem.
5-minute warning.
But yeah, unfortunately, I just don't have nearly enough time as I'd like to spend talking about it. But I think learning the methods, especially with the ins and outs of historical methods, are important. And well, part of the reason it's important is a lot of claims about, especially in political policy, are based on historical claims. So you need to be able to learn how to evaluate those claims. because otherwise people can use history to try to manipulate you.
Most definitely.
Yeah, especially if you look at what's coming up here or just happened. What actually was coming up here is Columbus Day, and and even John Oliver had on his TV show. He's like, "Why is this even still a holiday?" You know, most of the history claims about Columbus have been long refuted, and we know for a fact that he was not the first to America.
They figured, was that Amerigo Vespucci or?
No, well, not just that. You have the Vikings.
Yeah.
The Chinese were here in probably 1421. There's all kinds of evidence for that. I think they've even found a dig site that showed that maybe some people from the island of Crete were here before even that. So it's just there's so much evidence to show that he wasn't the first here, and there's all sorts of other questionable history surrounding him. And also you get people, distorting history left and right about the foundation of this country. So it's important to understand how to evaluate historical claims, and then sometimes you can apply them to your daily life about other types of claims. And that also with the scientific method will help you understand any scientific claims made. If you look over the report, you can see you might be able to see where there might be an issue with the way they conduct an experiment that shows that this experiment isn't actually valid. Is what actually has been shown a few times.
Yeah.
Where they test one test sample a different way from another, and then try to say that they're equal somehow. It's just, but unfortunately, we're running out of time here.
And there is somewhat of a difference, too, between knowledge of a technical nature, a historical nature, and of a philosophical nature. But we'll have to get into that some other...
Well, I should say, in a nutshell, it deals with varying degrees of probability. Where science and with technically and science and technical information and science is really the highest probability, the highest level of certainty. And as some people have said, science is basically philosophy with better data.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to, is being able to accept that even though you can't be absolutely certain about something, it doesn't mean we can't, make predictions or build our lives around it. Now that doesn't mean anything that's possible is worthy of being entertained. We mostly look about the most probable things that are true, or what we should look at.
Yeah. What I'd like to do is tell you once again to tune in to the next Free Thought Forum, which will be October the 28th, and I'll be the host that day, and we will be doing a comparison to from the way that I was brought up, with absolutely zero religion and zero religious teaching in our house, and compare it to a couple of people that were brought up under very religious circumstances and in an environment, such as Jacob.
Yeah.
Okay, so going to do a comparison there and see how I turned out, which people shake their head and say, "Oh God, he didn't turn out well at all." But going to do a little comparison, see what the difference is. So we thank you for tuning in, and we'll probably switch to the